I think what we have done in this nation today under Modi's leadership is to transform the nation from a low-wage economy to a high-wage economy. We are transforming the nation from isolated domestic restrictive economy to a globally integrated economy. Economy has been the driver, the lead horse. And we have already seen the stock market prices. We have seen the foreign direct investment more and more. We have seen the trade growing, surplus growing. All economic indicators, as we show in the book, clearly shows you that we are in a rapid mode changing, including annual growth rate of GDP. I mean, how you measure it? Elimination of poverty, whatever you do it. It's a matter of time where India will be the third largest economy by 2040 latest even, could be much sooner. And I find fascinating that Prime Minister Modi has a knack of phrasing it so quickly. I mean, you can get the message so quickly. I admire just for that, like reform, perform, transform.
Hello and welcome to New India Junction's podcast with Ananya. Today I'm joined by Professor Jagdish Sheth, who's joining us from the US, joining us virtually. Now, who's Professor Sheth? You can look him up on the web. He is the very reputed Charles Kellstadt Professor of Business at the Business School at Emory University. Professor Sheth is globally known for his scholarly contributions to consumer behavior, relationship marketing, competitive strategy, and geopolitical analysis. Professor Sheth has over 50 years of combined experience in teaching, research at wide variety of universities. Just to mention a few: University of Southern California, University of Illinois, Columbia University, MIT, and of course Emory. Professor Sheth has been also an advisor to the Singapore government in repositioning the nation for future. He's also been the policy advisor to the US government about the future of telecommunications industry. Also, very soon, Professor Sheth is coming up with a new book called India's Road to Transformation Why Leadership Matters, which is co-authored with late Sri Gyanendra Singh Ji. So, in this podcast, we are going to cover a wide variety of topics like leadership styles, what does it take to really lead and manage the nation, how is it so different from running a big company and being a big CEO of a company, how have leadership styles really evolved over a period of time and across the world, and what does it really take in a leader to transform the nation, and especially what does it mean in the Indian context. So, with that context, let us get started and welcome Professor Sheth, who's joining us virtually live from the US. Hello, Professor Sheth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ananya, for inviting me. This is exciting. I'm glad that we will have a good conversation. Let's make it informal, more funny if possible.
Absolutely.
I'm ready.
As I said that, usually at least in the Indian setup, and Indian students are very scared of professors and teachers. So it's great that you've put humor on the center stage, and let's use humor and make it a freewheeling conversation and make it interesting. Yes, why not? So, Professor, first of all, tell us a little about the book that you're coming out with. It talks about India, it talks about leadership. Tell our listeners about why should they read this book and what is it that they will know and learn once they have this book in their hands.
The book is very unique. Most of the books about a nation's transformation are based upon resources: land, industrial resources, agricultural resources, people resources. And that's basically an economic way of thinking. Very few have taken a leadership approach, which we thought was very fascinating. Gyani Singh was my student in 1971 at University of Illinois, an MBA student. Great career. He joined P&G for a long time. And he and I both agreed this is a great topic to think about from a management perspective. And that's how we started the journey. It's so unfortunate that he is not alive. He passed away recently, but he was very passionate. And so here are the interesting points. What we found through research of so many transformative leaders in the past, first of all, it's a long term journey. It takes at least 15 years to transform a nation, whereas you can reform in 4 or 5 years. Second thing we found is that you need a political continuity. Same party, same whatever system is in the autocratic system, whatever systems you have. And also, you need political stability during that time. No internal debates or what I call revolutions or conflicts, primarily, civil wars in many countries, for example. And ultimately, what does matter is a very pragmatic leader.
Right.
So we studied Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore and transformation of Singapore, Deng Xiaoping in China and the transformation. And what I liked about Deng Xiaoping's thinking was that he came here is a communist nation converting into capitalism or market oriented and comes out with a slogan, it does not matter what the color of the cat is, whether it's black or white, so long as it catches mice.
Right.
So pragmatic. So interesting. So to me, that was a very fascinating transition. But so was Abraham Lincoln in America. Of course, FDR, Roosevelt was during economic crisis, Great Depression, and then getting out, and then the World War II. So many examples. More fascinating examples came from some older histories, like Mustafa Kemal Ataturk transformed Turkey from basically a feudal society into a more secular state. I think those examples led to this conclusion that it takes a long time.
Right. No, I think that's great. You've actually just widened the outlook of the listeners in terms of when we talk about leadership styles. What has world experienced so far? And as you said, different context. And since you took the example of China, which is quite interesting, and I have a question for you. There's been a lot of debate that, coming back to the Indian context, where post-independence we adopted Nehruvian socialism. And I believe in your upcoming book, you've also spoken about how during 50s, 60s, and 70s, there were newer examples, practical examples of Japan, Singapore, Korea, and later even China, of how even though they might, and some of them might have adopted socialism as their stated ideologies, but their leaders did go a step further and chose pragmatism, as you rightly said, over sticking to an ideology and really using, taking practical steps to develop the nation and not stick to the ideology at the cost of the nation. So, in this context, do you think what's your take on late Pandit Nehru and then Indira Gandhi as prime ministers with stated ideologies? Do you think they somewhere let ideology, weigh more than seeing the real picture on the writing on the wall as far as what was needed for India's development?
Oh, I clearly think so. In the case of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, there are so many events taking place, both inside the nation, inside her own party. She was not really welcomed, as you know. There was a huge controversy within the party whether she should be the leader or not. Try to survive internally itself was a problem for her, managing internally. The country was going through enormous difficulties. We had a shortage of everything. Like a green revolution came because of that shortage of grain, depending on USAID. Anti-American sentiments were growing enormously because America had basically partnered with Pakistan in a significant way after the independence, and it was coming to a boiling point almost. And because of that, in fact, she became anti-American, basically encouraged General Motors, IBM, and Coca-Cola to exit the country. So there were tensions outside. To top it off, you had the energy crisis, 1973-76 energy crisis, which is a huge import for India in terms of oil. Prices shot up, so there was a whole economic issue. And of course, you had the whole splitting of Pakistan, East Pakistan becoming Bangladesh, getting involved. And there was no worldwide support for her. During that transition time period, she had to do something to survive herself politically within the party, but more importantly, to manage the nation, which is in a crisis. A lot of factions were coming along. The Akal Dalai, the Sikh movement was starting at the same time. So, given all that stuff, she barely survived herself.
Right.
Now, during this time, as you know, she even went through emergency laws, taking more centralized powers in the process to make sure that the states are not having the regionalism as much as having a national interest. And nationalized banks, for example, nationalized many institutions. So to me, even though she had the option of creating something, she ran out of time. For example, she had the poverty related to eliminate the poverty, but did not come to very well at all. And then, of course, he got assassinated. Nehru is a slightly different story. Nehru is more interesting. Coming from the colonial power dominating the nation for more than 100 years or 200 years, experiencing the freedom movement himself, becoming the first prime minister, Nehru actually did not trust colonial powers. More importantly, the constitution talked about socialistic pattern of society. Therefore, it embraced more the Leninist thinking of what is called the commanding heights theory. There are certain sectors of the economy you should never give it to a private sector. You can't trust capitalism or private sector. And in the process, he began to start this non-aligned movement. Now think about Ananya, so important. If he had not non-alignment movement started, if he had not done that thing, probably we would be a manufacturing center because the allies, the victors of the World War II, needed to outsource their manufacturing. They did not have the labor. They were doing very, very well, especially America. And we would have been the manufacturing capital today. We missed it. Rather than go to Japan or go to Korea, which is what happened eventually, and of course now China, we would have been the manufacturing capital.
That's a big
There'll be
lost
no China.
opportunity in that case. I mean, a lot of people
Yes.
ask why India is not the manufacturing hub despite presence of labor and such big human resource.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the biggest opportunities we lost at that time. Now we have so many more opportunities coming up, but it's something we need to remember in the history that there was a anti-Western allies because the colonial power and the history, which makes sense at that time for its time, but it comes to haunt us historically.
Okay, so let's then talk about. I mean, you have written a lot about the transformational power of leadership or transformational leadership. Before we get into specifics, you've read and researched about so many countries. Can you give the audience a sense of what, according to your research, are the key characteristics of a transformative leader in, say, the global context, in the national context? What does it take to be a transformational leader?
Transformational leadership has 4 or 5 key qualities. The first one is that it's an aspirational leadership. Aspire, thinking about the future in a very positive way, seeing the potential. Unlike the other styles of leadership, it's very clearly there. The leader is mission driven at the same time. While they have a vision of going in the future someplace with a positive outcome like a prosperity of the nation, education of the nation, health of the nation, all the well being index of a citizen in many ways. But they also have a mission I have to achieve by certain time.
Like, ये vision है, this is the vision, and how soon can we achieve the goal? Goal setting.
Exactly. Which is why it's a mission-driven approach primarily. There are deadlines, there are progress reports, there are metrics, etc. And I find fascinating that Prime Minister Modi has a knack of phrasing it so quickly. I mean, you can get the message so quickly. I admire just for that, like reform, perform, transform. Clearly shows you the steps you need to take. The second major key characteristic is that they're all very good communicators. They can communicate to the masses, they can communicate to the elite, they can communicate to leaders of the world. Communication skill becomes very important. And that comes because you feel positive about meeting others. Communication doesn't come just because you're a good articulate person, but you genuinely appreciate meeting with the other. Good listening skills is a great communicator. strategy also. And you can meet any levels of the people and you are very comfortable. Usually, a transformational leader also is where he loves masses or she loves masses and masses love the leader, which is interesting. They really like, and today with social media, I can have masses much larger than ever before, as we have seen. So that's a very interesting twist. At one time, it will be in physical get-togethers, like huge crowds coming in, like rock stars will come in, kind of stuff. So that's another major communication is the second one. The third one, quite important, is that they know how to execute. Execution is very key. It's not really what you say, but get it done. And I think Minister Modi clearly has shown he can get things that the previous leadership in India, while it was still there, it was their agenda, they couldn't get it done.
Okay, so I have two questions coming from these three characteristics that you mentioned, and I'll go backward. You said it's not important what you say, but really getting things done. Is there some sort of, because I was reading some of the work that you've done on leadership and how you say that followers also believe and find those leaders more authentic who don't talk about what needs to be done but really do it. So, do you think, and one example that comes in my mind is Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, with Prime Minister Modi not telling people to keep their streets clean but really picking up the broom. Like, how do you see that as a researcher, as a faculty who's looking into leadership styles? How do you think that impacts the psyche of people at large in terms of how do they say their leader when he's walking the talk?
I think it's most important. In the corporate world, surprisingly, we find that everybody comes to the chairman's office. Everything is orchestrated. So you are actually living in basically what I would call an ivory tower. We professors are not in ivory tower, but the chairman and managing directors of large companies are in ivory tower. So we always encourage management, leadership to wander around, managing by wandering around. Go out in front of the customers, listen to the customers. Go out in front of employees, listen to the employees. So the great leaders usually like to go out and meet and touch people, listen quite a lot from them, whether you do it digitally today or you do it physically, it makes no difference. I think physical still matters pretty much. I think that skill set is very key. So doing is most important. You are basically doing it yourself, and to me that's very common among all transformative leaders. They are getting things done rather than just talking about them.
Right. And then you spoke about communication. And you spoke about communication with a vision mission that has some sort of a timeline around it. In that context, since you laid this theoretical or well researched framework, in that context, how do you see or how do you apply, say, Prime Minister Modi's stated goal for Viksit Bharat or developed India at 2047? How do you think that feeds into the aspirations of people? How does it bring the nation together?
To me, giving hope in the future, getting things done, increasing the level of well-being in general, whether it's education well-being, health well-being, or economic prosperity. More people see tangibly the difference taking place in their own lives, but more importantly in the lives of their children. People always aspire to do things with their children. I think that matters a lot. And providing something in that direction is very important. And having milestones to show it can be done. Now, as I mentioned to you, Ananya, there are three types of leaderships in the book that I talk about. The book, one leadership is situational, where some crisis takes place, and suddenly you are the leader. The most recent example would be the Ukraine attack by Russia, and Zelensky rising. Here is a stand-up comedian who has no experience, no party, and becomes a leader.
Right.
You've seen those instances nowadays. Populism as a movement all over the world because there are so many crises taking place. So that's clearly one.
Okay. Situational. Yeah.
Situational, correct. Where the whole notion is short term, put a structure, there's a chaos taking place, there are protests taking place. How do you put a structure? How do you have sort of guidelines, etc.? Just surviving.
Okay. Firefighter.
Then, yeah, just and then you have of course, the other one is transactional leadership, where it's a status quo management. You want to continue in the power by giving, exchanging between you and your followers or opposition even. Lyndon Johnson was very good about making deals. Basically, art of making deal essentially is very key. That becomes the but it is not progress in the future. The most transformative leaders are always thinking about how to increase or how to improve in the future, pretty much. As I call it, aspirational leadership.
All right. So, talking about transformative leaders, let me ask you a direct question. Do you think Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a transformational leader?
I think in many ways, yes, he is. First of all, like all transformative leaders, he is mission driven, something that he needs to do good for the society. Ultimately, you want to give a self positive image. Think about the change. Even in my case, during the license Raj, we felt like hopeless. There's nothing we can do, we can contribute. And I will add something that is not in the book but very appropriate. If you take a grain of wheat and make it into a loaf of bread, the value add is only three times an agricultural commodity, a resource. If you take a rough diamond, a good diamond cutter will polish, get the brilliance out about 15 times. But if you take a human being, mentor, educate, polish, the value add is infinite. Transformative leaders always look upon people as the best asset they have, best resource, how to transition them from where they are. I think what we have done in this nation today under Modi's leadership is to transform the nation from a low wage economy to a high wage economy.
Okay.
We are transforming the nation from isolated domestic restrictive economy to a globally integrated economy and use of technology. It's incredible to see how much the nation has moved forward because of technology itself.
Right. Uh, so, on that note, if we think of social transformation, economic transformation, and political transformation, can you give me just a top line highlight of where do you think Prime Minister Modi's leadership has been most impactful as far as transforming society, economics, and politics?
Definitely economics. Economy has been the driver, the lead horse. And we have already seen the stock market prices. We have seen the foreign direct investment more and more. We have seen the trade growing, surplus growing. All economic indicators, as we show in the book, clearly shows you that we are in a rapid mode changing, including annual growth rate of GDP. I mean, how you measure it? Elimination of poverty, whatever you do it.
Right.
It doesn't mean problems are solved. It's a journey we are going through. We have not reached the destination yet. And surprisingly, on a purchasing power parity, India is already the third largest economy.
Right.
China is number one at about $30 billion. US is about 25 billion. We are about $11 billion and $1 trillion. I'm sorry. And ours is slightly underestimated because we still have a large cash economy relative to China and relative to United States, for example. So we think it's about 15 trillion roughly. And it will be catching up with the nominal GDP. Clearly, it's a matter of time where India will be the third largest economy by 2040 latest even, could be much sooner.
Right.
Ultimately, what matters is that people, how do you get people as a resource and uplift them to from a low wage to a high wage economy, which is how we measure low income nations, middle income nations, advanced nations. This is the transformation that South Korea did in 35 years. This is the transformation that Japan did also, transformation Taiwan did. And they are not just small countries, these are the same transformations done in the United States, in Germany. Our research goes across all the continents pretty much. So to me, economics clearly leads the horse.
Yes. I was going to say, we don't want to leave out the other two as well. What do you think about those two other aspects?
I've been somewhat surprised and pleased how much social transformation is taking place. Partly because this administration has blessed technology rather than not allowing the technology, but using technology as an enabler in a significant way. both for social transformation and political transformation. But social transformation is enormous in India now. As visitor coming every 3 months or 6 months, I find that the generation gap now in India is less than 8 years. The older sister cannot relate to the younger sister. We are moving that fast.
Yeah.
Even though we are a very traditional society on the one hand, but we are becoming very much like a global citizen on the other hand. That's mind-boggling. So to me, social transformation is taking place by enabling the technology and allowing the technology to do what they do. Social transformation is taking by taking certain issues like women empowerment. To me, it's a very major issue worldwide, and I think Indian government has taken a great stand about women empowerment. Look at the all the legislation passed primarily to have so many women in the parliament, for example, women's rights, for example. I think that's a very key. Those are the indications of social reform. Even the property taxes, amendment about property settlements between families, etc. There are so many reform aspects. So to me, social is happening partly by the government enabling things, and partly by the technology moving it much faster. Social reform is coming from a different way, which is what I want to articulate. I think putting technology like Aadhaar and UPI are bringing about a societal change. Think about a rural farmer or a fisherman today having a technology in the hand and getting into the most modern capabilities of e-commerce, whatever it is, marketplace. To me, that's a social change. He will not go back to doing manually as he did before. I think that's very key, happening in the school system, happening in the health. So there's a social change through enabling, blessing the technology or investing in technology. I mean, UPI is a great platform. So is Aadhaar. There's nothing like it in the world. So I think we are leading the world and, of course, creating aspirations through space program like Chandran, for example, and the other space programs that we have.
Yep.
Looking to the people to say, think about all you can do in the future. Your children can do it, or you can do it even. So appealing to the youth is very important. And to me, that's a social transformation. Political transformation is a little more difficult. I think, again, from the outside looking in, I find political transformation takes place by having no sense of entitlement to the party leaders. Rapid succession planning, bringing bureaucrats into the minister levels, like Jaishankar, for example, getting experienced bureaucracy, essentially, I would call it, whether it's in the
Technocrats, maybe.
yeah, exactly, whether it's Indian administrative service or Indian foreign service, Indian police. These are world class people. Those examinations are not easy to pass. We never used them properly.
Yep.
Bringing them into the government sphere, into decision making, into political debates, running for elections. I think that's a significant change in the party itself, whether it's a BJP party or any party. All parties will have to follow that. So to me, political transformation is the third area, but it's going to still take a little time.
Talking about time, I think one of the themes you are exploring in the book, which is very, very relevant for democracies, is how sustained change is important for transformation. Can you tell us more about, how it requires time and sustained change for the top leadership, and like in a democracy like India, which is not an autocratic society, you have elections all the time. How do you see that system, considering the transformation that this country really is at the brink of and deserves?
The transformation, of course, is more slow, painful. That's why you need a leader who knows how to transition through all of the maze in many ways. And there are three things that come in the way. The prior laws, we defined our laws in the 50. Not only constitution, but our labor laws, our land laws, all those are, which locks in the potential to go from a socialistic system or a mixed economy system to the marketplace. So the biggest challenge in democracy is how do you reform and change those laws?
Right.
and it's very high. That's clearly one big bottleneck. It takes a long time through democratic process. Second thing is that in the old days, we did not have digital technology. It was all paperwork. And paperwork is very much red tape, as we call it. You have files after files after files. And I've gone to many of these offices and you see files piled up in the old days. Today, making everything electronic mandatory has been probably the best thing the government has ever done.
Right.
In other words, you have to file your income tax online. You have to do everything online in many ways. Digitize, digitize, digitize
Yeah.
as a mantra. And to me, that's the reason why it's moving much faster in a democracy today than would have been ever possible. The place where it still needs to implement, of course, is in the courts. The court system is so slow yet, as it is in America. We process still very slow despite some technology. But I think speeding up the process, democracy is slow, messy process. How do you speed that one up through technology in all those areas? Changing the laws, for example, having governance done on a digital platform primarily, because it allows transparency, it allows going back into any abuse that is done. It basically reduces the corruption also at the same time. So to me, that's the second thing. Most difficult thing in democracy is neither previous laws nor lack of technology, but the biggest one is basically the culture. We have strong legacy, and those legacies come in the way. To change them is changing the society itself in many ways. But I must tell you, many of the initiatives were started by the Congress Party in the previous regimes. None of them could get it done. My best example is, the value-added tax, GST as we call it, for example. GST will generate more revenue than income tax, both at the state level and at the federal level. And today, therefore, you don't have to raise taxes. Basically, GST will become the dominant platform. It will more than suffice. So, and that was talked about for 40 years, but nobody could get it done. You can get it done. I've seen the same thing, many initiatives like that. Insolvency Act, for example, bankruptcy related, just goes on. So to me, that's the power of the admiration about this administration, that they get things done. However, they get it done. And in order to get it done, you need a majority, of course. You need consensus in some fashion. You need a multi-party, consensus of getting it done. Like GST was a pretty contentious thing, but somebody knows how to negotiate properly and getting it done.
Right. Uh, I know some of it might have been answered in this question, but let me reframe another question. How do you see Prime Minister Modi's leadership style play out in a democracy like India, which is so diverse? Everybody has different opinions, so many political parties, so many different diverse geographies. How, from the perspective of your research, how do you think his leadership style and charisma really goes a long way in bringing it together and taking these tough decisions and democratically?
Correct. Uh, Best thing about this prime minister is that he's a great listener. He takes ideas from everybody.
Mm.
You can post ideas on his website. He picks up the ideas. He has a staff of people. So he's a good listener. Great leaders are always good listeners. They don't tell, they ask questions. Second thing is that there's a sense of empathy. Coming from chaiwala background himself, as opposed to being in an elitist family, he can relate to the adversity that one goes through in life. Lower middle class at best, and therefore he can relate to that. As most immigrants do in America, for example, they come from humble backgrounds, and then they do very well. They always remember. So there's a sense of empathy or compassion, if you wanted to use the word. They're passionate, but you have to be compassionate at the same time. And of course, you have to be competent. And he displays all those three things. So great leaders always have those three things. To me, he has done a fantastic job. Communication wise, I just admire watching him speaking in Hindi. That's not his native language.
Mm.
He has a command of Hindi that I simply am blown away. Similarly, he has a command, of course, Gujarati language, but I have heard him mostly on Hindi language. And he is able to rally people. He is able to talk to them and communicate to them at their level. They can understand complex things that are happening. But the most important part is none of this, Ananya.
Okay. Okay.
I find more fascinating traveling worldwide, essentially. It's very fascinating to find him worldwide traveling. He's probably the most admired global leader today among all other leaders.
So
He can
if
relate
I
to
if I
Putin on the
ask
one
you,
hand.
if I ask you, sorry to interject, if I ask you,
Yeah,
and you raise a
yeah.
very good, because you're the right person to tell us about this. You're traveling around the world. You are using this frame and this context of leaders and what matters. Tell me, like globally, you travel around the world. What is, say, the global rating of the most popular leaders across the world? And where does Prime Minister Modi stand there?
Clearly, he's head and shoulders above everybody else. I think his rating of 76% within the country, but if you did even outside the country, in the diaspora especially, he would be even as good. The second highest turns out to be the president of Mexico, Lopez Obrador.
Hmm.
I'm surprised. I did some research on the top 10 world leaders. It basically drops after 3, 4 leaders to a significant level. And surprisingly, out of the top 10 leaders, 7 are from emerging economies.
Okay.
Poland leader is, which is very interesting because in emerging economies you see the brighter future. You can get to next generation as America did after Civil War, for example, or after World War One and Two. America became prosperous. Ordinary people never imagined they can be so well off. They can get more education. I think to me he ranks very high, highest actually by a long shot, from 76% to about 64% for Obrador. So to me, that's one side. That's basically polls within the country. But if you talk to leaders all over the world or watch their language, see the body language when they meet in like a, let's say, G20 format or the parliament or the United Nations meetings, however you do it, you find fascinating people like him. And the reason they like him is that he's very approachable. Fantastic memory I've seen. He remembers even smallest details of everything. It's on a personal level, not just on a professional level.
Right.
All great leaders relate on a personal level. And of course, they're able to manage all kinds of people, leaders. For example, Putin on the one hand, very different personality, to Gorbachev, to Biden on the other hand, to in fact Trump on the third hand, to Obama. They're all very different people. To Macron in France, all over the world, he is admired. They look forward to meeting him in group meetings. They want to take photos with him. So, to me, that's a great sign that when your peer group who faces the same problems admires you for your skill, leadership, whatever you do in transforming the nation, they wish they could do it in their own countries. All the diaspora and he has been able to, he's the first prime minister who has learned how important and strategic the Indian diaspora is worldwide.
Mm. Right.
He is able to use them in many positive ways. He's taking pride in those diaspora. He's inviting the Indian diaspora to contribute back to the nation. I can go on talking about it. To me, that is a key asset to understand where are my strengths, where are the things that I can leverage in many ways. And same thing is happening with the Indian diplomacy.
Mm.
We are in every country in the world, obviously, as a diplomatic corps, 200 or so locations worldwide. How can we leverage the Indian diplomacy at the same time to make them as chief brand ambassadors? Not just doing passport and visas, but strategically engaging those countries at the grassroots level in many ways. So to me, if you take a worldwide poll, I would not be surprised if he ranks, if not number one, maybe among the number 2 or 3 in the world.
Wow. Okay. Great. One other question on leaders. You've spoken about so many leaders. And when we speak about leaders, if we were to take, say, a 10,000 feet view of leaders across the history of time. We, of course, have Mahatma Gandhi, father of our nation. You spoke about Abraham Lincoln. We spoke about Chinese leadership with Deng Xiaoping. There are so many leaders across the history of time in Asia, in the US, in Europe, across. There was Napoleon, like there's so many leaders. From that perspective, how would you rate the how would you rate the leadership of Prime Minister Modi? If the history of the world would be written, what would Prime Minister Modi be so far, based on what we know so far? How do you think history is going to remember him?
They will remember him for three, four things: relentless pursuit, working 18 hours, 19 hours, making the people working for him work harder also for a cause or a mission. People will say he was so mission driven, clearly one. Second thing is execution, execution, execution. Third one, not just relying on friendship or personal relationship, but performance. If you want to work for the government as a service to the government, show the performance. Measuring your own, this is very unique. No leader in the world that I know measures the performance of their own ministers,
Right.
which he does, just like a corporation will do. So it's very fascinating. And managing a complex entity like nation building, which is much more complex than corporate managing or corporate building in some fashion, to me, people will remember that he took a sort of a corporate approach in many ways for efficiency, effectiveness, but transform the nation at the same time by identifying pockets of excellence, focusing where the country needs to be focused for the future, such as the space program, such as the technology, the new education policy is remarkable. The world actually looks at that and says, why couldn't we think about that one? It's only the diversity and the complexity of India that one can think about such a transformative change in education, as I think the healthcare will be the next one the same way. So to me, I think people will remember taking bold initiatives to transform, as you said, the political system, the social structure, as well as, in fact, the economic well-being.
Wow. This is so informative, Professor Sheth. I think it's almost like a lecture, very practical, applied lecture that people would pay millions of dollars for to get from you. But it really gives us all a great snapshot into various layers of nation building leadership, Prime Minister Modi's leadership, India's development, everything that you've discussed, and also keeping the global context in mind. My last question to you: you've raised a question in your own book about what is it that common people like me or the listeners or the electorate can do to help their national leader stay the course and ensure that we as people perpetuate a transformative leader who can get the job done. So we've spoken about what is it that the leader can do. Tell us what is it that people at large can do to ensure that their leader gets the job done.
In some sense, the answer may go back to John F. Kennedy when he mentioned that ask not what the nation can do for you, but ask what you can do for the nation. I think if our next generation youth think about, I can contribute, whether I'm a primary school child, I can contribute toward the nation by my own talent, investing in me, myself, my family, etc. But taking a pride in the nation. I still remember the days being away so far. People used to think about country India as a country of roaming cows and snake charmers. Today they don't think like that.
Right.
Today they think it's a country of highly talented people, destined to go someplace. Having a positive self image is probably the most important thing people can do to say, let me take a pride of who I am, my country of origin, and my nation.
Wow.
I think that's very important. Not just linking with my neighborhood, with my family, but linking all the way to the nation level, which gives an enormous sense of belonging. Otherwise, you will have a flight of people. People will go other places because they don't see any identity or a linkage with the nation. So nation building, one key characteristic is to make people believe in themselves and belong to the nation they belong to, take a pride on their identity no matter where they go.
Wow. I think we could have not concluded the episode on a more apt note, which you said, having a positive self image. I think that's how I'd like to conclude. As Professor Sheth said, have a positive self image, have pride in your nation, identify yourself with the nation, and get the job done, as he rightly said. Thank you so much, Professor Sheth, for joining us. I hope you had a humorous, interesting conversation, because I did. But hope to have more conversations going forward. And in case any of our audiences have any specific follow-up questions for you, I will incentivize them to put out their questions in the chat box, and we can then circle back to you and get some of the questions answered by Professor Sheth. So with that, we would like to close. Stay safe, stay healthy, and as Professor Sheth said, have a positive self-image and believe in the nation. Thank you so much. Bye for now.